Good morning. Welcome to today's webinar. We're going to talk about general contractors coordination workflow. We have the presence of Laura Heniak. Is a senior VDC coordinator and BIM process manager with Kilensi and Theis Construction Company. Laura has led implementation of technology in building design and construction for over 15 years in variety of roles. And Dr. Reliker, PE, PhD, Director of Research and Education at BIM Forum Global. Dr. Eicher will be moderating today. Welcome.
Thank you, Luisa. And Laura, thank you so much. We're really looking forward to part two of this presentation. And when we were talking, you're going to be going into more of the hands-on application of coordination process. In the interest of time, I want to go ahead and give you the stage, and you can start sharing your screen. And we'll probably have some time for questions towards the end.
Great. Sounds good. Okay, well, welcome everyone. Like Will just said, I am here to give the part two for those of you that were here, what was it, last month. I talked about some other steps, but we're going to kind of dive more into the hands-on piece like Will just mentioned. So a little bit about me. I think Luisa already kind of mentioned this, but I've got over 15 years experience in industry. 13 of those were in architecture. I am a licensed architect, so I can bring those design skills into what I do now, working as a virtual design and construction coordinator and a BIM process manager for a general contractor. So I've been over here on the construction side for about 5 years. I've worked in a wide range of project types, mixed use, multifamily, healthcare, K through 12, higher ed, and senior living. The images of projects I've got up here are some projects I've coordinated over the past few years here, including some large commercial upfit work, office core and shell, multifamily here in Raleigh, and then up in the right corner we see a recent middle school that was actually recently completed. So lots of different ways that we can use technology to help make these different types of buildings better. Both in architecture and in my role now, I've always been interested in how we can actually use technology to help improve communication and collaboration, both within and between different members of project teams. So a little bit about Clancy and Theis. We are headquartered here in Raleigh, North Carolina, which is where I'm located. We have 6 locations across the Southeast. We are in Newport News, Virginia, Wilmington, North Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina, Orlando, Florida, and most recently upstate South Carolina. We're now over 475 employees, so it's really exciting to be part of a company that is growing here in the Southeast and is really interested and excited about how technology can help us. So to talk about the agenda that we're going to be covering today, like I mentioned last month, I talked about kind of the part one of this. So how are we gathering information together? That's information from design teams, information from trade partners, really understanding the project and the building itself. So gathering all that data, and then how do we review it? So we talked about how we're verifying data, doing model checks to confirm that, for example, foundation sizes and depths shown on the model match what's actually shown on contract drawings. Same for ceilings. So how do we ensure that this model process that we're going to get into more today is actually based on accurate information? We also touched a little bit on how we share that information, and that bleeds into what we're going to talk about today. So today in part 2, we've got 2 topics we're going to really focus on. The first is how we find issues. That's the ultimate goal of what we're doing, right? And then how do we solve problems? I guess that might be the ultimate goal. So at the end of the day, we have a coordinated model. We can figure out all these issues in a model environment before any work is ever installed in the field. So we're going to start with how we're actually finding the issues. So the first step, I know we all have heard of clash detection, and that's kind of like the buzzword around what is done in VDC, but there's a lot more that goes into actually identifying issues in a model environment. One of the first things is just a straight up visual inspection. So that might be us walking through the model, either on our own or in a coordination meeting. having subcontractors actually give us their input because they are the ones that are going to be installing the work. So any input they have as to what we might be able to do is really helpful. And then relying on field experience, whether that is from our trade partners or from our own field staff. So one of the biggest parts of this coordination process and how we're tracking these issues is holding weekly coordination meetings. As I mentioned last time, for most of our projects, we do virtual weekly coordination meetings where we are trying to identify problems with multiple trades and talk about it. We invite designers and owners to be a part of that process so we can really get some more input on the fly and get some momentum going. So prior to each meeting, we want to make sure that we're organized and we're being really methodical about what we're doing here. So we have a task checklist that we go through. So obviously there's general meeting prep. A big part of this is making sure that we have the most recent models from all of our trade partners. We might have to do some supplemental modeling too. We want to make sure that's complete. And then we will federate models. Either we have historically used Glue. We are now moving into federating models on ACC Model Coordination. We also want to make sure as part of this prep that we're actually talking with our project teams, talking with our project manager to make sure that if there have been any new RFIs that have been issued that would affect coordination, we're tracking that so that our trade partners in coordination know what changes might be coming. We also have a pretty thorough agenda that I'll hit on here that we get out so that trades know what we're going to talk about. And then we want to do that model prep. So we are going to do these different types of inspections we're going to talk about, maybe clash detection, and then export it out to whatever platforms we're using. I like to start a meeting with everything kind of opened up and ready to go. I do, when I am running a meeting, I will be typing in minutes kind of on the screen in front of everyone. That way everyone can see what's being recorded. And if I'm making a note that isn't quite accurate, people can always chime in. It also makes getting those meeting minutes out so much easier than having to go back after the fact. I want to make sure I have working drawings open. That's one of the nice things about having, all of our drawings up on Build now is it's really easy to just have a tab open so I can easily search and filter and find the drawings that I need. And then after each meeting, we want to make sure that we're publishing a model that the whole team can use. And then we're kind of updating all these issues that we're tracking. And we'll get into those details in a minute here. And at the end, make sure everyone is aware of what we talked about. So when we talk about getting input from our trade partners, and we ask for this before we actually get into that meeting. So this is an example of a trade partner just working in 2D AutoCAD who has a separate modeler who's essentially modeling what their detailer is drafting here. But what's helpful is in this CAD file, our plumbers actually called out like where he's proposing to lower footings. So we can talk about that with the design team because of the way plumbing needs to be routed. We might also get trade partners actually coming into the platform we use for tracking issues, which is Revisto. So they can come in here and they can actually call out their own issues. Like we see here, we've got some conduit, hidden some duct. So our electrical trade partner was able to call that out for us. They can also put really detailed information into the chat feature here within this issue tracking so that we've got everything consolidated into one spot. So in a meeting, I'll actually be adding to this so we've got all the information in one place. We like to keep the coordination process as flexible as possible. That way we feel like we get more engagement from trade partners. We know a lot of people are really comfortable and familiar with Navisworks. Pretty much everyone has it and knows how to use it. So in this example, we had, I think this was someone doing, must have been mechanical piping modeling. Actually, they gave us all their viewpoints in Navisworks. And then they had some markups here, so we were really able to easily see in the model where they're finding an issue that we need to talk about with the whole team. Because we're using multiple platforms, being able to switch back and forth between them is really crucial. So we do have some tools here within Revisto so that we can use the platform that we find really helpful for issue tracking, but still keep folks in Navisworks. So there's a switchback feature that works kind of both ways. So I can start in Navisworks, I can move into Revisto. I can get to an area where I want to be able to, like, maybe someone requests a viewpoint. In this case, fire protection. Excuse me, 1 second. Sorry about that. Fire protection had requested Navisworks viewpoints. I'm not going to do this for every trade, but in this case, I was able to really easily switch back between my view and Revisto and get it into Navis to make a viewpoint. I can also, as kind of like a baby step, hop into Navis, and I can use an add-in to make an issue directly in there. I've got some trades actually doing this right now, either from Navisworks or from Revit, from their native model, and then I get the issue where I'm tracking everything else. Because we do take advantage of the Autodesk Construction Cloud, we also do we have people doing model walkthroughs from the merged model that we weekly post up on Build, or I should say on, let's just say the ACC, Autodesk Construction Cloud. So what that means is any team member, that might be a project manager, it might be an architect, it might be an owner, can actually come in here and walk through the model. I think we all know that it's a lot easier to like walk through a model than send a bunch of different screenshots, because then you really get all the full picture of what's going on in a certain area. So that'll be kind of our first step of going through issues, is relying a lot on visual inspection and on input from others. Now is the point where we're going to get more into clash detection. So I like to start with like a heat map approach, because I know that, you know, there's a lot to sift through at the beginning. I'm not someone to like do clash right from the start and get very detailed, because it's just so much to sort through. But I will use it to try and highlight, okay, where are the big problems that we need to address first? We can take advantage of, within Clash, of some automated grouping tools. That way we can more easily see our information. And then kind of as we go, we're going to increase our tolerance and look at more and more specific items. So to start, you know, I might be using Navis, like in this case, where I'm just, this is actually the office building in which we work now, that we coordinated a couple years ago for the core and shell. So I can do like an initial snapshot of just clashing everything, all systems against all systems, and really see where we're going to be focusing for the next couple months. So I might take that information, and I've just hopped over to another project, another platform here. I'm looking at Revisto here, where I still have that kind of same heat map mentality. I can kind of see trades obviously here have done some work, so there aren't quite as many. But now I can take advantage of this automated grouping. So in this particular project, the project was, 6 different areas, or in this case, they're called zones. So that way I could actually model geometry within Revit, load it into this platform, and then it can determine in what area of the building the clash exists. So it's giving me more than just a grid line intersection. I can actually group it now by these different zones. I can group by levels. I can group by proximity. So different ways that I can more easily condense this information. I also have a lot of options in here to ignore. So in this case, I was looking at overhead systems, but I knew that the plumber was still working on his gas piping. So I didn't even want to bother looking at that, because I knew that was to come. So I could set it so that I wasn't going to actually include that in my clash. We're doing another project right now where we're looking at hangars. So we wanted to be able to, we were getting clashes because the plumbing hangars weren't modeled quite perfectly. We were getting clashes between plumbing hanger and plumbing pipe, which obviously wasn't actually something we wanted to review. So we could make the search where we were clashing the plumbing hangers against overhead systems, but then come in and actually ignore plumbing pipe. So it gives us more flexibility to really drill down to the information that we need. So we're going to start, you know, once we're getting the clash process in place, we really want to make sure we're able to evaluate our different options. So we're going to start by prioritizing our systems, starting with like the less flexible things and kind of moving into items that can move. We want to make sure we're really clearly identifying action items. That way everyone knows what they are responsible for. And we also want to make sure that we're coordinating with the field throughout all of this, because we can, work on a model all day, but if we don't have buy-in from our field teams, both trade partners and internally, there might be some discrepancies in how work is installed versus what we've coordinated. So this is one example of how we might set up a very structured clash test so that we are starting with the big stuff first. So generally, we're going to first look at structure. We're going to focus on really large elements like duct that doesn't have as much flexibility to move, sloped pipe, depending on the project, lights, it really depends on where those are at. And then we kind of go through and we can kind of like march down this list and make sure that we are being very methodical about the process we are using for this clash process. So in this example, this is from a tenant upfit of 4 floors of a 20-story office building here in Raleigh. One of the first things we looked at was structure. So what we're seeing here is we had some poke throughs for electrical to match up with some furniture layouts that we'd received. We early on identified that there were some conflicts with the poke throughs with concrete structure. So obviously we knew that that furniture would either we'd have to figure out how to connect to it in a different location or how that would work, because this would not work with structure. In almost every school project we do, we often find that we end up with toilets over a steel beam. So that's another case where we're trying to find that information early on so that we can address those really big items first. So next, like I said, we've taken a look at structure. Now we're going to take a look at like big duct. So in this case, we had some corn shell duct that was already installed. So we asked our mechanical trade partner to focus on locating the duct that couldn't shift. So we could kind of set that as a constraint for the team. Like this duct is there and not moving. So as we got into like new work to be installed, we were able to, set those large pieces in place early on. We'll then start to move into things that have more flexibility. In this case, we very clearly saw that like what we see in red here is fire protection, green is duct, and pink and yellow are electrical. We could clearly see obviously that we had like a sprinkler line going through duct here, so that would have to be fixed. However, we also had someone on the electrical side comment that we needed access above this cable tray. Sometimes we actually have trades, often I should say, we have trades model in clearances for any maintenance or installation or access. In this case, we did not actually have that geometry, but someone was able to call out in the meeting, hey, we also need access above that cable tray, and that fire protection line is impeding that. So that's where we can also rely on input from other team members. So it's not just VDC working in a silo here. We also want to make sure that once we're getting into kind of these more detailed areas, that we are still mindful of, everyone's systems. It doesn't want to be a race to like, we've got plumbing and mechanical figured out and electrical has got to do all sorts of wacky stuff. That's what we're trying to avoid within this process to make it more collaborative and really to get the best end result. So we can take this information and we can use this model in different ways. So we are using OpenSpace as a standard on all of our projects. And I'm actually going to flip to this live and we'll see how this works. I think one of the coolest features of OpenSpace, so let me pull this up here, is that we can load in the model. So with OpenSpace, it's a 360 photo documentation platform. So we can use this to track progress. We can share this with owners. We can share this with designers. So we can do a side-by-side of actually different stages of progress. So I could see when this is all closed in, I could come back to this view here and actually see how things were installed. But what I think is one of the coolest things is that we can load in our coordination model, and then as we spin and kind of walk around, and obviously I could hide some more things over here to make it less glitchy, but I can actually spin in this photo, and as I'm like walking around in this photo, it's actually going to walk me around in the model too. And I think that's just one of the like coolest things that has come out in VDC recently. So what we can do is we can take this and we can get a really clear like side by side to see if work was installed as we had actually coordinated it in the model. And then it can also do the reverse, where we can pull this up before, you know, rough-ins go in, and we can actually see the model side by side with the current photo and see what work will be in the future. So like I said, I think this is really helpful for a lot of different folks on our team. Okay. I'm going to flip back to my presentation here. Here we go. Okay. And like I said, we are doing this as a standard on all of our projects now. And open space is also kind of revamping a lot of their model environments. I'm really curious to see what that actually ends up looking like. It's pretty exciting. Okay, so now we've actually found, you know, I'm not going to say all of our issues because we don't find every single thing, but we've identified conflicts and clashes. Now it's time to actually solve the problems. The biggest thing here is making sure that we are really clearly communicating this with everyone on the team. So we have access to different reporting tools, we have access to different filtering tools in order to be very clear about that. So as I mentioned before, we start each meeting with a really clear agenda. And we want to make sure that like in the agenda that we have time to actually talk about what's going on out in the field. Like, are there any schedule updates that affect coordination? It might be, you know, they're pouring concrete in 3 weeks. So we want to make sure that we get sleeving drawings done that week so that there's time for the design team to review and we can make any changes before concrete's poured. Because we do have, you know, file locations, all cloud-based, often at the beginning of a project, we will do some review on where things are actually being stored. We might go through a model status update, especially at the beginning, to see like what percentage complete is each trade in different areas of the building. We'll then move into other like general project info. Like I mentioned before, we want to make sure we're staying on top of any RFIs that will affect coordination, as well as any drawing changes that have been issued that would affect our coordination team. And then as far as coordination items, the way we're doing these agendas now is instead of regurgitating issues that are already being tracked, whether they're in Revisto or ACC, we can just spit out a report and attach that to our minutes. Previously, I know this is how some folks still do it. You know, we used viewpoints and Navisworks, and then a separate Word document with very specific action items. If we kind of zoom in here, we can see this was really hard to like keep coordinated, to make sure that like each viewpoint we had saved, that we're defining like who was responsible in a very clear way so everyone knew what was coming. With the newer platforms that have come out in both Revisto and ACC, we can now really easily create an issue on the fly. So if you're sitting in a meeting with me, like this is what you're gonna see. We will fly through the model, or maybe someone's already given us a heads up that we've got some fire protection going through duct. In the meeting, I can really easily create an issue here. I can give it a name. And then it's going to actually, you know, keep track of all these. So in a model view, like I see on the right, I can see all my issues color coded by status with those little bubbles. I can filter it. So let's say I maybe want to look in my model and only see plumbing issues. I can do that filter. The other thing in here is that we can tag information. So we can tag who's responsible. Is it design team in this case, a mix between design and fire protection? or is an action item mechanical. We can track all of that. You'll see it also includes some metadata of, I talked before when we were talking about Clash about it detecting the building area or zone. It also knows the room and the level. The other thing here is that we're trying to keep everything in one place, right? So we're actually copying in. If we get like maybe a marked up snip from a designer in a meeting, we can paste that into this chat here. We can make other notes. And that way we've got all information on one place. So if we would ever need to come back and figure out why we did something a certain way, or we just want to track the history of like how we've gotten to a certain solution, we have all that information really readily available. And like everything, kind of nowadays, we have some really good reporting tools. So this essentially is my meeting minutes now. So before, when I showed, the like Navisu points and the really like bulleted list meeting minutes, we're still doing, official minutes that include all that stuff shown on the agenda. We're actually using the meetings module within Build, which has been working pretty well. But I can spit out this report. And then, so what this means is that at the end of my meeting, I might just have to do a little cleanup, but then my minutes are essentially done, which has been a huge time saver for our team. The reporting tools within here, we have a lot of filtering options. So let's say maybe I have a one-off meeting. In this case, I was talking about foundations. So I could tag all the issues that I made during that meeting with a specific tag. I can then make a report that only shows those specific issues. So just other ways to get across information. I think I've mentioned the like metadata that here in Revisto, it's automatically detecting the room, which honestly is huge. I used to go through and like manually put in the room number for each issue, but now I've got that automatically. And then, like I said in that chat, we can take notes during a meeting and we can actually assign action items here. So I did want to, talk about different platforms because we are now looking at ACC model coordination. So this is what we get when we're looking at issues within Build. So we have the same ability to assign it to different people. We can flip to different models. If we look here, we get a little screenshot attached to it of what that clash looks like. And we have the same kind of chat comment ability that we do in our other platforms. So there's different ways to do it, the key here being that we're keeping everything in one place. Another issue, this is actually within ACC model coordination, where we can see our clash and we can kind of click through and open up other clashes. And I see a chat question here. In your meeting minutes on everything related to clashes and R5s, yes, we generally, so there sometimes is some overlap between the minutes and the issues, but I do my best to keep all the comments within an issue. That way everything is in one place. I try and keep like the actual like meeting minutes and Build to more like general items we might be talking about. But that is a good question. And let me know if that does not answer the question that I just saw in chat. Perfect. We've also used, we're not only doing this type of model review during construction, we are also doing it for constructability reviews. So we are contractually obligated on all of our public school work here in this county to do a constructability review at different stages during design. So VDC is engaged during construction documents, like 2 different phases, to do a model review. So this kind of takes a different way of actually looking at the model, because it's not like a typical coordination process right before the building is going to be constructed, because the project is still, the design is still being worked on. So you've got to look at it with like a different eye and really be aware of, what is still being worked on, but what's an actual problem that needs to be resolved now. So this is an older snip, but it's still similar of what that issues platform is like in Navisworks, so that I can make an issue within my model. And then I can get the same kind of list that we saw before of all of my issues. The nice thing about this is that then my project team can come in here into build and then or actually like open up an issue and see more information about it. They can also see where it is in the model. Now this, to get a little in the weeds here, this project was done by using an NWD model that was saved on build, not model coordination. That has its own quirks because with that, you can't actually see all of the issues within one singular model unless you're in model coordination. This is not a model coordination presentation, but I do want to note that there are some little like quirks that are still being worked out. But the key here is that we want to make sure that our team has the ability to get into the model and see where issues are. We've got the same kind of reporting tools so that we can actually show, just spit this out. This is so much easier than some manual processes we used before. The other thing I'd like to point out when we're doing these constructability reviews is we kind of split what we find during our model review into two different categories. So we will have coordination items, or not coordination items. Well, yeah, we'll have coordination items. And those are items like what we see on the right to coordinate horizontal roof drain leader piping with duct and steel. That is something that we will actually do like once we start true coordination with trade partners on a project. We're also going to split it up and identify constructability items. So in this case, looking at toilet rooms on top of a mat foundation, like having the design team be aware of that and make changes if necessary. The example we often use is a project recently, a couple of years ago, where roof drain leader piping was conflicting with foundation, which we saw very clearly in a model. We were able to tell the design team, they were able to lower those foundations before drawings were completed. That way there was no change to the actual bid documents and saved everyone some money and time. Everyone loves a dashboard, dashboards everywhere. We do have that ability here. These are some ones that I pulled out yesterday out of Revisto's dashboards, which were actually super easy. What we wanted to do here was kind of pull things out by trade and by area. This way our project team, like our operations team, could really easily see what trades needed some extra push to kind of get things done as we're wrapping up coordination here. So just different ways of basically looking at that like report that we have. And the nice thing about this is you see like when I showed the report earlier of how I could, just tag and then filter by that tag for a report, it's the same tags here. So I'm using information that I've already built into my model. So we've done all this work, to like communicate this information with everyone, but we also want to make sure that we're creating a really collaborative environment. So as I said, like in coordination meetings, we invite designers and owners to be a part of that. It might be where we just talk with trade partners for a half an hour and then invite designers and owners to join a half hour later so that we kind of work out some of the kinks before they get on the call. We also want to make sure that, we are identifying conflicts. We want to make sure that we can actually provide solutions so that when it comes time for the design team to respond, they have something to work with to get started. And then finally, like we do a lot of drawings here within VDC. A lot of us here at Clancy and VDC have architectural backgrounds, and I think that kind of helps in putting these drawings together to be really clear about what we're trying to show. So here's an example where I wanted to be able to, give the design team a report of all the issues that require designer input. What I can also do is I can, within Revisto, automatically make a key plan. So what I'm just doing is I create a sheet in Revit that has the view bounds, or view range, I should say, for like an entire level. And then because it knows where all these issues are, and I think I mentioned this in my last presentation here, that within Revisto, if we are able to export coordinates of sheets from Revit into the Revisto platform, it then can automatically align them So what that means is I can pull in a 2D sheet. It knows where this 2D sheet exists, like within 3D space. So it knows where all of these issues are within that space. So this key plan is really handy because I don't have to manually like mark where all these are. That is happening automatically. So maybe a designer isn't in every call. What we can do is we can include this kind of, I call, key plan with it, so they can really easily see where each of these things are happening. This is a good example where we're looking at an amenity area where we could see that there's obviously a lot of, conflicts up in that kind of like mid upper left area. So we could really focus on that with the design team. This is actually in that same project where we were looking at the parking garage. So I'd included this image last time where, as part of our supplemental modeling, we're actually modeling in a clearance for the garage. We might do the same in like a retail space. It's what you see in that transparent orange color here. What's green is exhaust duct. And as you can see, that was dipping way below that clearance. So we had to work with our team to figure out how we were going to make this garage work. So we had a couple meetings where it was included the mechanical engineer, the architect, the owner, and our mechanical trade partner. So we came up with some options, and then we made notes. Our mechanical trade partner went back and made changes. And then what we did here is we put together, a plan like we see on the bottom. But then we also did some 3D axons from, I'm thinking this is from within Revit itself, where we could actually make some notes too. So what we're showing in red means like we made the change that we talked about, but it still doesn't work. So that way we could really clearly show, what was going to work and what was not. So then we had another meeting, and talked about it some more, and kind of went through, this was on a different parking level, and really tried to work out how we could make this exhaust duct work. In the end, it ended up being a mixture of duct and fan, but it really, because of costs involved with that, the owner wanted to make sure that like we could absolutely not make this duct work, which we were able to really clearly show with these drawings. We'll often also kind of verify pools. So in this case, we had some differences in dimensions shown between, I think what I'm showing in green was from like a pool drawing, what's in orange was from a structural drawing, and I think architectural's in there too. And we were concerned about overhead clearance below that pool. So just being able to put all this information on one drawing, and then our team could then send this over to the design team to try and nail down what the actual desired dimensions were. We also will look at pools in terms of like enough space for filters and all the other equipment and maybe piping related to that as well. So in this example, we were asked to kind of illustrate the biggest items that we'd work through in coordination. So on the left here, this was in that office fit up that I had shown earlier. We had this large kind of bleacher area. You can see it best on the like lower right image in that left half of the screen, where it was a 2-story space with these array of 9 monitors on each floor, with the idea that like that's kind of an on all hands area where everyone can come here and actually see these screens. Well, what we discovered during coordination to start is that the core and shell duct that was already installed encroached upon those screens. We went up a level, and we also saw that like new work, multiple systems were routed in front of those screens. There was also an item with fire dampers where we needed fire damper access behind those screens because it was inaccessible from core and shell toilet rooms. So this took a lot of coordination, not only with our trade partners, but also with our architects. I mean, I did a number of sketches. This wall is also angled, which made it even trickier. So we did a lot of sketches ourselves, is like confirming RFIs or asking for architectural input so that we could really help the designer figure out how we could locate those screens to fit all of the systems, reroute them as needed, and provide the view angles that they needed. So it was a pretty extensive coordination exercise. On the right here, we can see where we were installing a new kitchen in this same space, where we had what we see in like the lighter green is core and shell duct, and the lighter blue is core and shell plumbing, where we had some conflicts between new and existing systems. So we had to kind of rework that to reroute it. We also, on the bottom there, we can see other systems where we had conflicts between new duct and core and shell work, and we're able to work through that with our trade partners and design teams. So at the end of the coordination process, we are creating drawings. In this case, we are looking at some sleeving drawings. So the way that we are doing our sleeving drawings is we do coordination within a model, and then each trade is responsible for providing us with, I'm going to flip ahead for a second here, with a drawing that actually dimensions out each of their sleeves. We then take those drawings from all trades and we compile them into one. And then what you can also see here is we bring in our PT shop drawings, which you see in like the light cyan color. We also bring in this case, embeds, which you see in like the gold color, so that we've got everything on one drawing. What that means is we can take this compiled drawing and we can use this to QC in the field. So we will actually go out and do a flight with our drone and get a really high resolution image. And then we just overlay it on top of that drawing. We might have to tweak the image a bit to get it straight, but this is a really low hanging fruit. This is not, super accurate, but it gives us enough for what we need. So we've got a video here. Oh, oops. That kind of walks through this process. Maybe. There we go. So we have drone pilots in each of our office. And what we're going to do with these, we're doing a lot of post-tension concrete. So we want to make sure that we're going out and actually documenting these field conditions. Like I said, we've got that sleeving drawing that we can then overlay on top of the photo. And then we can actually go through and basically see, is there a red dot on the deck where there was a blue dot in my drawing? We can also look for blockouts and sleeves. In this case, there was some confusion over what was going to be installed. We were able to get sleeves in at the last minute. You can see how they're jammed in there, but we got it in right before concrete was poured. So you can imagine if we were trying to get those in after the fact, because the plumber had assumed there would be a blockout, it would be really challenging. This is also where open space comes into play, where we can actually go out and we can do walks before concrete's poured. That way we have other ways to kind of document it and QC it. Images I don't have in here is we do have a surveying team in-house. So let's say we do that like this 2D sleeve coordination and we find something that looks maybe off, but we're not sure. We can go out and really accurately capture that data. The thing about this process, it's very fast. Including the drone flight and the time it takes to get back to the office and like load this all together, it just takes a couple hours. It is really quick. So other than sleeving drawings, we also produce drawings to show other coordinated services. So that might be underground, or in this case, we're showing overhead. And that does the same process. So this is after, we've coordinated with the design team, we've got the responses we need, we've got everything working. We provide a compiled sheet like we see here on the left that just shows graphically what's going on. And then each trade, like we see on the right, is responsible for doing their own dimension drawing that shows elevations and dimensions from control lines. Our trades sign off on this, and then this is what becomes a record of our coordination process. So there's a lot of parts and pieces to make this all work. We want to make sure that we are being thorough, we are being proactive so that we can really identify those issues early on and get them solved.
Laura, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, what percentage of your projects would you say are design build versus design bid build?
Most of them are design bid build, almost all of them.
Um, you ever have projects where the design team wants to use, like if you're coming in early, do they ever
Mhm.
want to use any of your drawings as part of the construction documents?
No, I have never had that request.
Okay. We've had,
I
go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say I did have a designer once request. They were doing some um, coordination. There was a sand filter under a parking deck, and they wanted us to model the sand filter for them and kind of help them understand how that would work. So that's one case where we were engaged like a little earlier than we normally would be, to help them out with that process. And it was one of those cases where, by helping them then, that made the actual coordination once we got trade partners on board a lot easier because that part was pretty much done. Like they had been able to coordinate that during design.
Yeah. We've had some case studies we've looked at where it was design build, and the trade partners, say for enclosures, were brought on early in design assist, and
Mhm.
they finished shop drawings 2 weeks before permit drawings were complete, and the architects used the fabrication model for their elevations, and the details that showed up in the construction documents for the enclosures were from the shop and fab drawings.
Oh, cool.
And they were ordering steel, I mean, ordering aluminum and glass as soon as the permit drawings were released, and
Mhm.
fabricating it within 2 weeks. But it's just different workflows. It's almost as if the technology is the easy part, and it's the sociology and contracting
Yes. Mhm.
to get the teams together. Has it come up where you've looked at needing errors and omissions insurance when you're producing drawings that are used in the construction process, or has that topic come up in your firm? Because like an architecture firm would have errors and omissions insurance for design drawings.
That topic has not come up for us. We're also not like each trade is doing their shop drawings.
Mm-hmm.
Like we are not actually documenting anything. Like the drawings that we do are generally things that are sent as like a confirming RFI or something. Um, but like the actual drawing that's produced at the end of coordination, like we just graphically show things. We're not providing dimensions or notes or anything. That is all the responsibility of each trade partner. And then they are signing off on it.
I can also I can see the talent and expertise in just communication in your drawings. One thing I noticed in this presentation is y'all have really good looking drawings in the sense that they're easy to read
Mhm.
and they communicate well. Particularly some of the ones you had about halfway through where you're showing the parking garage in context. You're showing sections, elevations, plans all on the same sheet.
Mhm.
It makes it really easy for people to understand the problem and get to a solution faster. And
Yep.
so wanted to compliment you on those.
Oh,
What
thanks.
do you see, just in general, design side, where could modeling be better? Is it in electrical? Is it plumbing, HVAC, structure, architecture, landscape, civil?
So you're talking about like models we're getting from the design team
Yes.
themselves? We use the architect's model pretty much as is. Like we will verify ceiling heights, things like that. But for the most part, the only architecture we care about is walls and ceilings and floors, maybe.
Right.
Structural, we're usually, I shouldn't say usually, like if it's a steel building, we're getting a model from our steel fabricator. So we might use the designer model to start out with, but we know we're getting more information. We also sometimes get models from our concrete trade partners. So like the concrete isn't as critical, although I'd say that's probably only about 50% of the time we're getting that. As far as the models from the design engineers, we will, like our trades will use that as a starting point. I recently had someone ask me this question, which I think is fine. Like I have no problem with someone starting with something, copy paste, but then they are actually going through and like putting in their own content. So when we're doing those constructability reviews, like when we look at mechanical duct, we always have to make sure, like there was a case recently where it was going to be really tight below steel, but they don't have insulation modeled. So we have to make sure that like we are accounting for that. And I think the bigger thing too is just in design coordination. We see that one come up a lot, like not allowing for adequate room for duct with insulation, especially in really tight areas.
Right. And that one, really things like insulation, the design team knows it because they're writing the specifications. So they know how much insulation they want. And, they know gravity lines need to slope. They know, what plumbing needs insulation on it, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I could all, but to your point, I think design coordination is a little different than construction coordination in the sense that, well, I'll share my perspective on it, and I want to get your feedback. I believe they're a little different in that a lot of electrical is not typically modeled because it's left to the electrician to run their routes. But we have a concept of what's there, particularly coming around electrical rooms. We have an idea that there's going to be um, large amounts of congestion in electrical, but sometimes that's modeled, sometimes it's not. Um, Not all mechanical piping is modeled, for example. And then there's variations of units. A lot of low voltage data communication we're seeing in design models is not modeled. Um, and so design coordination, you almost have to just make allowances and know content is coming that trades are going to model later. Because at least in most of the markets I see, I don't see the architects and their subconsultants doing a lot more modeling beyond LOD 200 in the above ceiling space. But I'd get your feedback on it. One, do you see these as two separate coordination paths uh, based on the life of the project? And if so, how do you see them in the markets that y'all are working in?
It's interesting because I actually have been over the past years thrown out a couple of submissions for a couple conferences about doing a panel on like the gaps that exist between design construction and or
Yeah.
design coordination and construction coordination, because I think there's some places where we can tie in a little bit better. Obviously contractual requirements and contractual or how like what type of contract is in place has an impact on that. But I also know, like from my experience as an architect, that like things are moving so quickly. I know why
Yes.
things happen. Like I'm very sympathetic to designers in that aspect because I
Yes.
lived that. Um, but now on this side, like the first year I was in this job, I was like, oh wow, there were things that I would do a lot differently, like if I were to go back. Um, but I don't, I think just making sure that we're being cognizant, like during design, of actual like space requirements, especially if you're selling like this really high ceiling space. That's what we encounter in a lot of our multi-unit market. Like these amenity spaces with these really high ceilings that the owner wants. But then once you get in there, you're like, well, this just isn't really going to work here. So we've got to either shift things or like no one ever wants to lower a ceiling, right? That's like the last option.
Right.
But sometimes we have to. So we really rely on our designers to like, if we have the space, like adequate space in which we can route things, we can make it work.
Right.
But there are times where we have to ask. And I think it's probably in the multi-unit market, we probably see that the most, where we've got to make some more changes. And I know that's just the pace of like private development work.
It's fast paced.
Yeah.
And there's an old quip that design's done when you run out of schedule, fee, or both.
Yes.
And then the rest is ways and means of construction.
Yeah.
And so some teams have called this other phase called design completion, and that's where the contractor picks up the design and starts coordinating it. But it's just a challenge of the industry, I think.
Yeah. And I will also say, like, the designers I have worked with over the past few years have been great. Like, they are on our coordination calls, they
Yes.
are flexible, like, they are understanding what we're showing, and they are really, like, happy to provide us input and get because we're all working towards, like, that end building. Kind of like what you just said, like we're just kind of taking it over from design. So, we can work together, and I've gotten great feedback from designers over the past couple of years.
So a few areas that are new to BIMform Global's LOD specification are expanding roofs and also landscape architecture and subgrade civil utilities.
Mm-hmm.
And are those areas, these have been a lot of building focus, and I think that's traditionally in the vertical environment of buildings, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit there. Are y'all already using BIM in areas of your building enclosure review meetings? And then also, what are you seeing out there as far as landscape and subgrade civil utility coordination?
So we will sometimes do modeling for subgrade, like coordination, because we're just not getting models of that. So that's something that if we do realize like we've got some tight coordination, like we will model that ourselves. The other areas you mentioned, we're really not seeing a lot of models coming in through that. And like we had an example recently where we wanted to relocate a roof drain, but it was just all done in 2D. Like we said, this is where we want to move it.
Right.
The roofer figured it out in 2D, was like, well, you can't move it there, but you can move it here. And that was that. And sometimes like I don't have a problem with 2D at this point. Like,
yeah,
it's still, whatever we can do to get the job done. And if that is the most effective way to do it, I think it's perfectly fine.
Yeah, I think that's also refreshing just to, our goal here is to find solutions in the most efficient, economical way for the owner. Because at the end of the day, we're using their money, and whether we're design or construction side, our goals are to be a fiduciary of their resources. And there is a place still for 2D as far as communicating what's there, particularly if that's what that trade speaks in. If you've got a trade like a roofer and they speak in quote unquote 2D, then just speak in their language. And in time, that doesn't mean we'll always do roofing that way. I think the modeling of that I have seen increasing with trade partners who are doing roofing that can model at those levels, but it definitely varies across markets. Laura, you have been wonderful to do this with us. I really enjoyed getting to see your presentation. Final thought I had, I just wanted to ask, we only got a few minutes left here, but a lot of talk about AI and where things are going. What have you seen automated the most over the last few years in VDC coordination? And what do you think is the next step of low-hanging fruit? I'm seeing auto grouping of clashes, and but when we talk about like intelligent analysis of the process, where do you think automation might go next with coordination?
That's a really interesting question. I should have been prepped for this. I should have known there was going to be some AI question. But I was recently talking, I feel like I've had this conversation a couple of times over the past like 6 months or so. What we're doing here still takes a human because there's so many nuances, and it's also that like each model is different. Like each trade is going to model a little differently. So I think that's where we can't automate quite as much as we think we can, because it is still so so unique. But like those automated groupings and the intelligent metadata, so it knows like this thing is in this room, like that's a huge help when you're trying to like communicate things and when you're trying to organize things. So I think those levels of like just using the information that we already have, but like having a platform that can actually pull out that information intelligently.
Yeah, so intelligent grouping, automating, grouping, finishes paired with rooms, probably exit and egress checks. I could see connectivity between the architectural plan showing, hallways and exit ways, and low voltage sensors and alarm systems and things like that. Structural loads that are, need to be varying floor capacities over the concrete slab if it's an exit egress, it's got to be 100 pounds per square foot, whereas office space or living space might be less floor loads. I think there could be intelligent checking there. And so it will be interesting to see where all
Yeah.
this goes. And I would like to invite you and take you up on the idea of doing a panel where we talk about the
Mhm.
nuances between design coordination and allowances and construction coordination that's more detailed.
I don't
Thank you
have the
so
answers,
much.
but I think other people do. Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great. So I
Very
appreciate
good.
it.
Take care.
Yep, you too.